Hello and welcome to Access Chat. It's just me as a host today because of various issues of connectivity and gallivanting around the world. So I'm very happy to welcome back a returning guest, Steve the Legend Tyler. And Steve was on recently talking about some of the work that he's been doing with Leonard Cheshire and other stuff. But as part of that conversation, we were having conversations afterwards about the general state of accessibility. So we thought that there were probably other conversations to be had here. So, Steve, welcome back. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for the return visit. I'm very pleased to be back.
Yeah, excellent. So, we were talking off air about the state of accessibility, and I think Deborah was a little despondent about how there seems to be retrenchment and so on and so forth. And you were saying, well, actually, there's good stuff happening too. And I think I feel that too. Some stuff is hard, some stuff goes backwards, but there's also systemic stuff that's happening in the background that sometimes doesn't get mentioned. So you had a couple of examples of this.
I really did. And I'm very conscious, of course, we talk endlessly about the challenges because that's what we're here to try to fix, or at least some of us are, and, I can't help all the time thinking what a ludicrous situation we're in, 95% of homepages inaccessible, the employment rate in people with disabilities, the educational attainment rates are lower in people with disabilities. Latest reports, no change in 60 years in the UK in attainment and employment rate. Truly horrific. And one of the ways that I've, Neil, we've talked before about these types of challenges, and one of the during my career, I suppose I've realized and learned and then begun to implement, ways of bringing about change. And the way I tended to think about it was you had to meet people wherever they were, whether, you're dealing with a business or a government entity or whoever it was. There was no real, there came a point when it was very difficult to talk about accessibility in a relatively complex area, which actually we've made even more complicated in the disability community, but relatively complex stuff around disability and how you make accessibility happen. And very rapidly you get into, well, okay, how do you define accessibility? And then, well, what about, accessibility for a deaf person compared to the accessibility a blind person requires, or somebody with, and before you know it, you're in this world of just complication and consultants and really quite negative stuff. And one of the things that I began to focus on was, let's understand where people are. Well, where are the majority of businesses? And it seems to me that most people understand, at least have an idea of what they mean when they say customers and delighting the customer. A lot of companies and entities use that phrase, wanting to understand their customer. So behind the scenes, I've been working on ways of creating ways of bringing that to life. How do you put together frameworks that remove the complexity and turn the conversation into something that says, you understand, you want to acquire more customers. Now let's talk about what customers mean, and that customers come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and have slightly different needs. But one of them is they want your service, they want your product. Anyway, I'm always therefore shocked and amazed when I come across a product or a service that absolutely, blows me away. And this happened recently, and it made me really think about. I was irritated on one hand. Well, why can't the world be like this all the time? That was the little negative thought that happened. And at the same time, I was thinking, but good on you guys. You really did deliver. This isn't just a minor. Someone has genuinely thought through the customer journey. So my first example is switching broadband. And anybody, I think most of our audiences will know that have ever been through this process. If you have choices around broadband providers, there is a sort of faint feeling of dread as the day approaches. So you sign up because it's a better deal, it's cheaper, it's faster, whatever it is that's attracted you. In my case, all of those things. And then the day closes in and you think, and there's a promise, the promise of the world. It's all going to be fine. They're going to turn up. They're just going to lay some cabling. It's going to be lovely. And in an hour and a half, you'll be back online. Now, I know in many cases that's simply not the situation.
Absolutely, it's why I have a mobile router just in case.
Yeah,
call me paranoid
yeah,
or call me sensible.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, paranoia definitely kind of kicks in. Anyway, the day came. Engineer turned up, and very quickly it was like, there was a bit of a discussion. They were outside laying the cables for fibre to the premises. And I knew that there was going to be, I began to think, okay, this isn't going to go as well as they told me. So I know, not quite sure. The ducting we're using, there seems to be a bit of a blockage. Anyway, look, we'll do our best. We may have to get somebody out, though, to have a look down there with a camera. But anyway, perhaps that won't be necessary. And I thought, well, okay, I'll busy myself now that I'm entirely cut off from the world for the moment by unpacking everything and setting it up in readiness for when I maybe get switched on. And imagine my surprise. So I was moving for those of you who are not in the UK, there is a very large organization here called EE, Everything Everywhere. And EE came out of a whole host of things, but the mobile element of it used to be Orange, known as Orange, and there is still an Orange France and a range of other Orange entities. But anyway, it always had the kind of, I suppose, the reputation and tried to make sure it was innovative and different to everybody else. Well, I opened the boxes, and my first real genuine surprise and delight was baked into the router, into the plastic of the router. So it wasn't, along with the print, was Braille. Braille signage of the ports and the connectors and the phone connectors and the USB. I thought, wow, that's okay. That really is surprising. I've never seen that before. And then it was uh, really obvious. It was really obvious how you were supposed to put this stuff together. And the engineer came in and he said, "Oh, the blockage has been resolved fine. It wasn't a problem in the end. Oh, you've got it all set up." I said, "Yeah. Did you know it had Braille attached to the?" I said, "No, I've never noticed that before. God, that's amazing, isn't it?" Anyway,
Yeah.
so he was as shocked as I was. And then the contract signing. So contacted EE contract people. They said, right, and again, my heart sank, thinking, oh God, this is going to be one of those horrific things where. And the message, after you jump through security and text messages quoting PIN numbers and stuff, said, right, I'm going to send you a link now, and it's kind of a shared screen session. Hope that's okay. I said, well, I have no idea. Yeah, because you need to sign the contract and the agreement that we're right. Okay, fair enough. Let's go for it. And again, I clicked on the link and fired up the website on my mobile phone. And I got a message saying, looks like you're using assistive technology. Would you like to use the assistive technology kind of supported system? Yes, I would. Okay, what is it? Is it screen reading tech or is it magnification? It's screen reading tech. Great. Here you go then. And lo and behold, the entirety of the contract signing, and it is pages. It's about 26, 27 pages of stuff, which you've got to tick boxes, go to the next element. And I was doing all sorts of changes, mobile changes, broadband and home phone changes. Pretty complicated, but absolutely breezed through it. And I came away from it thinking, firstly, how brilliant. I fed back to EE. I told them how great the experience was. And by the way, it's not half bad broadband either. And I kept being delighted, by the way. I don't know how it does it. I'm assured that it's something to do with very special AI systems in the background. But the home phone thing, landline, which we've still got, is there because of both of us, my wife and I, have elderly parents, grandparents to the children. And, we've maintained a landline for that reason. Don't get many calls other than parental ones, other than quite often nuisance calls, which it now announces. So the first time it happened, I was really shocked about 3 days in. And it rang and it said nuisance call sent to voicemail. Well, thank you very much. so, so all of these things make me
What
think,
it didn't tell you, Steve, was that was your mum.
you can never. This is the thing. There is a bit of you got to watch this stuff. It doesn't begin to be too smart and in fact wrong. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's filtering out all of those nuisance relatives.
Yeah,
but, it's great technology, and credit where credit's due to EE for doing that stuff. I think that what's really interesting is that essentially they must have been doing some kind of browser sniffing on your device investigation, which has always been quite contentious in the sort of accessibility community, because a lot of service providers are wanting to do it to, as you've just experienced, provide really good service to their users. But there are people within the sort of expert community who are saying, well, this is an invasion of privacy. And so I think that there's always a case with assistive tech and accessibility and tech in general, to a certain extent, where there's a balance. You give up some of your privacy and information about yourself in return for that better experience. And I think that maybe we need to be having that conversation again about what's acceptable in terms of, where do we set the line of what's acceptable in terms of gathering that information about users without prior knowledge and all the rest of it, so that we can provide a better experience. And then it's not like we're then broadcasting that information further afield.
I agree with you. The other in our favor, or stuff that I guess interesting, I can't remember. I've got the report either delivered at Zero Project last year or Techability, one of the two. But there was a piece of research through a mainstream coding provider, and they make a whole host of apps. Basically, they are subcontractors. But they requested, because they're interested in exactly this, how are people genuinely using iPhones, Android products, etc. And they wanted to know, and so they you can't get personal information. They made it very light touch. But the key thing, the built into the coding, was enabled to pick up and then report was what elements of the accessibility capabilities of your smart devices are people switching on? And that's a really, really interesting stuff, because the short version is those things that we've classified as accessibility, around 65% of users, random sample, millions of, I think they did, it's about 5.5 million people that were in this cohort where they generated the report, but around 65%, just over, had switched on what we refer to as an accessibility thing. So clearly, you could see in the numbers, the more complex requirements. So, screen reader users or eye gaze users, much lower in terms of percentages, obviously. But in terms of, making your product easier to see, making it darker or lighter in contrast, making all of those things that are normally bundled into accessibility, quite an amazing number. And we're able to pick that, or they were able to pick that out through these sniffing techniques. And it's particularly interesting because it's actually really difficult to get hold of this info from anywhere.
Well, I know, because we've actually been doing something similar for the workplace. So we've actually been, because the work that we do within my day job, we support a lot of people with sort of basic workplace IT, Windows, Office, your line of business apps, and so we built some tooling that enables us to look at, again, anonymized data, look at what's installed on any given client estate, whether that, third-party assistive technologies, JAWS, Dragon, Zoom Text, all of these kind of things, but also looking at which of the operating system and the inbuilt accessibility features have been activated. You can drill down by region. You can see whether or not people are using, more than one feature, and so on. And so this data is really fascinating.
Yeah.
And the numbers are far higher than the 4 to 7% of people that are reporting having a disability.
That's right. And it kind of neatly leads me on to another example, actually, which was my HP example. And these things stick out, again, simply because they are so unusual. But I deliberately bought an HP printer. It's a family printer. It does all sorts of things that I never normally would think of using, like producing photos and stuff. But there we are. And it's got a scanner built in. It's an all-in-one. Brilliant piece of kit. The nice thing from my point of view is it's controlled by an app. And I genuinely didn't have much. I didn't hold out a great deal of expectation around it. I mean,
no.
Printers
are the
good.
Devices of the devil, right? They are they are the most cutted and awkward of IT equipment.
They are, and of course, and lots of moving parts and stuff that can happen and go wrong, and jammings of paper and goodness knows what else.
Yeah.
Imagine my surprise then, when I mean, so one of the things you effectively, the entire business, once it's set up, is completely controllable. I can see and control. I can do it for myself. I can produce stuff myself. I can control the printer myself. I know how much ink is, whether it needs replenishing or renewing. I can look at the status of the thing and see whether the thing is jammed or what it's reporting on screen. All of that kind of stuff. But I think the delight bit was when one of the things they offer is making cards, making your own cards, postcards, birthday cards. Anyway, I made a birthday card. They've got templates and everything. I thought, well, let's go for it. I can always kind of, get help from one of the family if life gets tough and I lose my way. But no, I was able entirely to integrate a photograph a family photograph, put a message in there, and make my own card without any assistance at all, and then print it off and send it to a member of the family. And that, I really was, again, it was one of those moments where I thought, it reminds me a lot of the very first times you, as you've been watching and pushing and developing technologies as we've gone through life and career, you get very sort of obsessed and engaged with whatever you're doing, and kind of forget what the real outcomes feel and look like. And there's a friend of mine who, Neil, you might be very aware of. His name's Richard Orme, who I worked with very closely over the years, and we did a lot of work on publishing, and creating, making sure that there were ebook standards, and eventually, Amazon and e-publishing of all kinds, and Apple Books and so on. We used to set each other little tasks. So we'd be at some random place in the world or in the UK, and I would say to them, right, I would like to read Complicity by Ian Banks. Go for it. And the objective, and we would ask each other these things depending on where we were, could be in an airport lounge, could be on a high street. And the objective was, it didn't matter about the format, didn't matter about, as long as I could read it, he had to provide it for me in the cheapest, most efficient, fastest way possible. And it had to be, and even if that meant, and if the only way of doing it was scan it in manually, well, so be it. But ideally, we wanted it to come through some kind of commercial or provider mechanism. And one day, we'd done a lot of the hard work. These services were becoming available. And now, of course, we wouldn't, it's certainly the less technical stuff is very accessible in most cases. But there was a book. I was lying in bed. I think it was, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, listening to a podcast. And they were talking about this book called The Disappearing Spoon. I thought, wow, sounds interesting. Didn't really even think about it other than I wouldn't mind reading that. That this chap called Sam Keen is a scientist popular scientist who had written about it, written this stuff. Went on to, I think it was iBooks, searched for it, found it, downloaded it while the podcast was still playing. And it was only after, the following morning, sometime much later on in the day, I thought, I kind of realized what I'd done, that like everybody else, I'd just bought a book. I listened to it. I thought, wow, that sounds good. Gone was the 18-month wait for it in Braille, or the special recording for special person that might take 4 or 5 months, or the special request which may or may not be accepted depending on how popular the book might be. I can have it now.
Yeah, the immediacy.
Yeah,
because that's one of the other things. I mean, we have a mutual old friend, Kevin Carey, who used to talk about peer equivalent, experience.
peer normative.
Peer normative equivalent, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what's happening here. We're now starting to get peer normativity in sort of commercial experiences, and that's what equality really is. It's and accessibility really is about when it comes down to what you want in life. It's not, can I tab 53 times to get to something, and yes, it's vaguely accessible and horribly usable. It's actually, can I have access to a product or a service in a sort of equivalent amount of time with a similar ease of experience to some other consumer that doesn't have a disability or accessibility need. Now, it may be that you have a terrible experience, but that's peer normative because they give a terrible experience to everybody.
Quite. I don't mind. I don't mind the terrible experience if it's terrible for everybody else as well. Well, so be it. I mean, appalling, and hopefully we'll all look for another one.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have the same, whatever that experience is. And we've been trying to back to that customer thing, I suppose. I just, like most of us in the disability community, want to do the same things at the same time for the same price as everybody else with no hassle, but delivered in a way that's accessible. And more recently, I've been trying to. The reason for focusing on the customers, I've had a number of discussions recently where I've commissioned bits of work or been part of a development. One of those is a piece of work to see how hard can we push the current AI mechanisms available such that they could bring to life the following idea. You go on to, as a business, you own a shopping site. And our AI system can say, yes, I can see what that is. I know it's got a basket, it's got a payment system, it's got categories of things. Yeah, I reckon it's a shop. Right. Okay, I will treat it like a shop and allow you to explore it in whatever way you want. And let's take a straightforward idea that it will do a dialogue-based exploration. So you can call it up. And the beauty of this, of course, is my favourite persona, Mrs. Miggins. Mrs. Miggins is about 75, 80 years old. The very person that could benefit most from delivery of her shopping to her home without having to go out and buy it, can spend all the time she wants walking down the aisles and checking out in the detail or not, and putting stuff in her basket and then going for it and buying her weekly shop, or any other shop. In this case, could we do it so that she could call it by phone, talk to it through her smart speaker, and it would guide her? Hi, Mrs. Miggins. You want to browse or search? Of course, browse. Okay, I want to browse. Okay, there are 15 aisles. First one's the bakery aisle. Do you want to go down the bakery aisle? Yes, I do. Okay. Well, there are 15 categories of things here. Tell me when you want to have a look in more detail. Bread. Yep, I'll have a look at some bread. And those things potentially are very, they are game changers. The interesting thing is, for me, is when you're talking to people that have the power to deliver these things. So I say, look, with the least effort, I want businesses to be able to embrace this technology. How far can we make this a reality? And the response from, I won't mention them, very large companies, let's put it that way, is, Steve, that is an amazing idea. Amazing. How did you come up with that idea? And they are mystified by how amazing this idea is. Just as I am equally mystified by how it is they didn't think of it.
Yeah.
It's not an amazing idea. What have you been spending your time doing with this amazing AI stuff? I don't know. But one of the things you haven't been doing is helping Mrs. Miggins.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that are on the cusp, right? So I think that when we talk about the big buzzword of 2020 buzzwords, agentic AI, right? Are they hold out some real promise. There are certainly services in the sort of Silicon Valley bubble where you're already being able to appoint an agent to go and do shopping on your behalf or call up and make a doctor's appointment and all of this kind of stuff. Now, Mrs. Miggins could benefit from that. She could buy some meat pies from next door to Sweeney Todd's. She could, let's face it, navigating the appointment system on your local GP's website is a pain in the behind. You could ask the agent to hold on the line and try and book an appointment. So there's all sorts of real potential for these AI assistants, but there's also a significant issue of trust and privacy and all the rest of it, because you're having to give away, and like not just sort of data about your sort of use of assistive technology. Now you're talking about your financial data, your intimate details, knowing, you know, your most intimate likes, dislikes, your proclivities. So, you know, there's enormous power, but there's also, you know, enormous responsibility on the behalf of the companies that are potentially offering these services.
And what's scary, Neil, and this is really, for me, the big call out, not just to the disability community, to all communities, because I think we all benefit. You know, I was recently at an event where I was presenting to, it was an AI event, actually. All the providers, all the things that you've just mentioned, were very concerning around, you know, trust and things that people have never really had to, or a lot of people have never really had to think about before too much, like what their data is being used for, whose control is it in, blah, blah, blah. You know, complicated old area. But what was really interesting to me is many management teams will think about AI in terms of efficiency. It's efficient, makes life more efficient. And the presentation I gave was, it's always a bit controversial going here but I don't know how else to do it to keep people awake or something. So it was a genetics thing. That was that was the conference speciality. And the point I made very rapidly or early on was, guys, I'm going to give you two examples around the word efficiency and your usage of it throughout this whole conference. The first is, of course, we want AI to be as efficient as possible in the area that it most thrives in and can most be beneficial. For example, analyzing patterns and recognizing cancers. Obviously, we want it to be as efficient and fast and effective as possible and accurate. And we want that delivered very, very rapidly. Why? Because it frees up clinicians to find solutions. And with the help of AI, they can find solutions even faster. Happy days. Now let's think about the other term, the other way you've used the same word, efficiency. Efficiency in engaging with your doctor, efficiency in getting information. And often, and my point really was, quite often we confuse those things where efficiency you often think of as efficiency from your perspective. In other words, well, with a good AI system, I now don't need to, I don't know, pick up the telephone, enable people to talk to their doctor. I can just farm them off to the web or give them information. And my point was, actually, this is where you begin to lose the plot. I mean, if you take something like health services, it's a human delivered to human received service. It's human, right? I'm not ringing my doctor or calling my doctor just for the hell of it. I'm calling them normally because I genuinely do want to talk to someone that has some knowledge and I would like reassurance or whatever it is I want out of it. What I don't want is for you to use your AI to fob me off. So my plea is put humanity back into tech development. I think that's where we need to go.
So I think that's a great place to end, because we've slightly overrun. It's always easy to do when we have such great conversations. And I'm going to actually shout out for another podcast, and that's actually one called Freakonomics, which is one of my favorite.
Love it.
Freakonomics Radio, one of my favorite podcasts, and they recently had a couple of episodes on nudge theory, but the reverse of nudge, which is sludge, which is where they start introducing all of these frictions into processes. And they were particularly focused on the US healthcare service and because the insurer pays and so on. And rather than strictly rationing, what they actually do is they make it really difficult. And that way they are essentially restricting access to services by making stuff difficult to understand, difficult to access, etc. So again, we have to think about where, we put humanity at the center of our service design. Steve, it's been a pleasure as always talking to you. Look forward to continuing discussion on social media. Thanks again.
Good to catch up.
And thank you to our friends at Amazon and at MyClearText for keeping us on air and keeping us captioned.